Today is a really special day for us, celebrating not only the kickoff of our wellness program, but also later on this afternoon, we'll be dedicating the Caroline Huber Holistic Wellness Center. And I want to acknowledge Sam Huber, the son of Caroline Huber, who's here with us today. Thank you, Sam. And also the vice president of our foundation, Susie Wyman. Susie, where did you sneak off to? Susie, thank you so much for being here. I can remember it clearly. It was February 1st, 2005, really cloudy day here on campus, but suddenly the clouds parted and the sun came out, and we brought on campus for the very first time a brand new hire. Student development specialist, Marlena Frank, was hired February 1st, 2005. She has been with us as a professor since that time, served on the crisis intervention team, and she now serves as an associate professor in the psychology and human services program. She is our resident positive psychologist. She's a speaker on all topics related to mental health and well-being. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in communication at the University of Colorado, Boulder, and then went on to study and earned her master's in science degree in counseling psychology at Northeastern, where she had the opportunity to study with a really incredible professor you're going to have an opportunity to hear from today. So, Marlena, please come on up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, President Stout. And it's interesting how everything comes back around. So Dr. Schmelzer was my professor at Northeastern University, and I'm going to get into a more formal introduction, but I just want to say good afternoon to all of you. And before I bring Dr. Schmelzer up to the podium, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that are attending in person. I know it seems sort of surreal, right? We're kind of getting back to life, and that's why this is such a timely presentation on emerging from COVID and sort of realizing the reality of what we've been through. But I also want to thank the many people that are on webinar right now on Zoom. We have a very high count of students that have logged in online from all over the country. I've had the pleasure of knowing our speaker for over 2 decades as a professor, a mentor, a thought leader, and a wellness advocate. I was lucky enough to have been her student in graduate school at Northeastern, and Dr. Schmelzer impacted me in countless ways, so I'm really happy and thrilled to be able to introduce her to all of you today. Dr. Schmelzer is a licensed psychologist and a trauma survivor. She has worked for 25 years with the complex issues of trauma, integration, and behavior change across every level of system, from individuals to groups to large systems and even countries. She is the author of Journey Through Trauma, published in 2018 by Penguin Random House, and I think most of you got a copy today, signed, and if not, stay afterwards. If you registered, Dr. Schmelzer will personalize it for you. She has a very impressive educational background. She has degrees from Mount Holyoke College, Springfield College, and a PhD in counseling psychology from Northeastern University. She completed her psychology training internship as a Harvard Medical School fellow at the Cambridge Health Alliance and completed her postdoctoral training with adults in behavioral medicine at UMass Medical Center. A few places you may have heard of before, right? Yeah. Gretchen is a senior associate with Telios Leadership Institute in transformational leadership development, executive coaching, and management consulting, working with individuals, groups, organizations, and countries to help them achieve the change they want to make. She's also a 2-time national champion in rowing. Gretchen also has extensive experience in performance enhancement for individuals and teams working with Olympic, masters, and collegiate level coaches and athletes. As far as her faculty background, as if this is not impressive enough, she's faculty and adjunct faculty in the Department of Counseling Psychology at Northeastern University, where I had the amazing ability to meet her, and adjunct faculty at the University of South Florida Medical School. She's currently a lecturer in the Medical Education Master's Program in Penn's Graduate School of Education. She was recently featured on CNN with Anderson Cooper and Working from Home with Richard Quest. We are very, very lucky to have you here today, Dr. Schmelzer. So without further ado, I would like to welcome you up to the podium. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Marlena. Thank you for having me here today. It's a real privilege to be here. I'm not used to podiums. I usually walk around and I talk with my hands because I, too, grew up in New Jersey. That's what was not part of Marlena's introduction. And the other part that wasn't part of Marlena's introduction is that community colleges are near and dear to my heart. When I was 16 years old as a high school student, I wanted and both needed to get out of my house. It was a crazy and violent place. And I found a way to become an exchange student in Germany. But in order to leave, I needed to finish all my high school credits before I got out. And I had almost all of them except for a history class, a second History 2. And I took it at Bergen Community College. And I don't remember the content from that day, more than like the stock market crash, I think, happened during that class. But what I do really remember was how I was made to feel. That I, a scared 16-year-old in a classroom full of college-age and older students, was given a sense of belonging. And that really mattered to me. And I will say, from the moment I walked in the door at Brookdale and was actually greeted in the women's bathroom by 2 people, and then cheered on by a number of people in every room, I haven't felt this much of a sense of belonging in a system in a long time. And one of my goals is to take the feeling I've gotten, even just before I got to speak, and bring it to other places I go. I'll be a pollinator. I'm in this flower, and I'll take the pollen to another organization because there's just been such love since I walked in the door, and I can't highlight enough how healing that is and how much that will help people grow. So let's see, where do I want to start? I will warn you, I ramble just a bit here and there. I speak quite often. It doesn't mean it never gets easier, honestly. So for those students in the audience who think, oh, I hate speaking in front of class, it's hard, I will actually underline that. It's hard. And the beauty is that you get a chance to try to say something, and you never know who takes it away with them, right? I wouldn't have known the impact I had on Marlena if, 20 years later we hadn't had a conversation in the same way, right? You don't know. So brave your voice is one thing I'd like to say. I'm going to start with a poem. Talons gripping the edge of the nest, wings spread, gauging the wind. A young osprey pushes off, soaring. With each practice flight, the young bird returns to the nest, laying at his mother's feet one twig. Every evening in the dark, bright quiet of the moonlight, the young bird sleeps, while his mother, taking his twig, builds a nest in his heart, so that when he flies away, wherever he lands, the young bird is home. With each practice flight, the young bird returns to the nest with one twig. We like to think that healing, that growth, that change happens fast. That's what we're sold. Every diet's 3 easy steps, right? Everything's supposed to be fast. But all healing, all growth, all emergence is incremental. It happens one twig at a time. And while the poem is really in some ways about the gift of one generation to the next and how we get built, in the old Jungian way of looking at stories, we're all part of the story. That you are the young bird, you're the nest, and you're the mother. And that's what we need to be doing for ourselves to come out of this. We have to be taking each twig we can find and rebuilding our nest. Think about what we've been through the last couple of years. There's some serious nest building we need to do, right? I guess we'll just skip. All right. So in a break from tradition of the standard speaker just standing up and lecturing for the entire time, I'm also going to make you guys talk, but just briefly. And it's going to be a little controlled chaos. And those of you watching this at home online are going to be asked to join in on the chat, or invited, I guess, on the chat. And so we often start when we're talking about trauma or we're talking about wellness, we often start with what's not there, what hurts, what's broken. And actually, I'm a strength-based trauma person. People tease me that they say instead of being a trauma-informed whatever, I'm an emotionally intelligent informed trauma person. Like, I like to bring the strengths into trauma so that people can feel their feet under them first before they grapple with things that are hard. So for 1 minute, and I have a fancy watch that can do timing, I want you to turn to a person or two people next to you, say, "Hi, my name is," and then share a strength of yours that you feel like has served you in these last 2 years with all that's been going on. All right? 1 minute, ready, steady, go. And stop. Oh, you guys are so good. Without even training. Whew. I can't wait to see where we're going to be at the end. It's like peak workshop. How was it to hear other people's stories? Good? Make a little contact? Isn't it fun to be together again? It's amazing. I was telling people on the way in, I'm like, this feels like a dream sequence. Like, I had a dream. I went to a college. There were all these people. So it's just, revel in it. Feel it. Take it in. I mean, I think that's the other part we have to start doing more, is paying attention to what we're actually experiencing so we can get the benefits of those moments of contact. We're so used to wearing our masks and staying away that we're not actually allowing the smile in or the laughter in, right? So take time today and kind of, swim in it a little bit. So, we were talking about the nest earlier. The most dangerous time for a bird in a storm is not during the storm, which is what I always think of when I see the wind blowing. It's actually after the storm. After the storm, nests can be disturbed so they don't have a place to return to. And most importantly, their food sources are usually disturbed. And so for the days following a storm, it can be hard to find things to eat. And I think that we collectively are living in the post-storm experience. That our nests have been disturbed, our routines have been disturbed, and the way we get to nourish ourselves, which we're going to be talking a lot more about in terms of wellness, right, and resilience, the ways we nourish ourselves have been disturbed. And so that's where our attention needs to be focused, especially around relationships and community. There's been a lot of research showing people feel lonely. There's loneliness factors off the charts right now. And loneliness, the definition of loneliness is, the gap between the connection I want and the connection I currently am experiencing, right? And it doesn't mean the connection I'm in. I could be sitting in a room full of people, but not feel connected, right? So that's, to me, I go wildly hopeful because we can each do something about that. We can smile at the person coming out of the post office or the bank, right? We can stand in the line at ShopRite and be like, oh, nice handbag, right? Those things, those are twigs. Those little things matter. And we think that it needs to be some big intervention to heal. Actually, it's 1,000 little twigs that will build that giant nest. So every time you do that act of connecting to somebody else, you are healing them. But you want to know what's really cool about the research on loneliness? It's that actually we feel less lonely when we do something for somebody else, right? So And that's in our control. We can choose to help somebody. We can call a buddy and say, hey, let's go down to the elder council and read for the evening. We can do something around those things. We don't have to wait. So, I'm basically a growth and development nerd. I love all things growth and development. I started my career, the first 15 years of my career working with kids and families, so I started in the kid world. I have taken that love of growth into the grown-up world, as I call them, and my colleagues are like, no, they're adults, right? But I really believe in growth. Nature wants to grow. I'm a big fan of nature. Trees keep growing every year. Their rings keep widening out, right? It's actually a force that when it gets stopped, that's where the problem is. That's why I do my work around trauma. Not just because I want to heal trauma, but because I actually want to take the barrier to growth away. Trauma shatters growth. And so in order for people to grow and be their biggest selves, we have to help people heal. And healing actually follows a growth cycle with a few extra components in there to support it. But it's really all about growth. And the reason I'm passionate about growth is that every person in the world has a gift to bring. They have their way of being, whether they're a teacher, or whether they're in marketing, or whether they're a physical therapist. It doesn't matter what you do. It's that you bring you to that thing. And it's hard to bring all of you to that thing if you're protecting parts of yourself that have been hurt, right? And we need all of you. So that's my mission. That's why I'm here. And that's why I'm going to talk to you, probably too fast for an hour. So I have 3 beliefs about healing. The first is that healing is possible. And I have worked now, I graduated in '87 from college, was working already in the mental health field. I have been working in it for a long time, and I have seen it happen. I've worked with kids who have had a really hard time. I've worked with physicians who've had a hard time. I've worked with people who've lived there through the Khmer Rouge War and come out the other side. I've seen it work. It doesn't magically happen. It doesn't happen because time passes. It happens because people are strong enough and have persistence enough to have the conversations they need to have and to re-engage in their life in a pretty courageous and brave way. Which brings me to the second principle, is that healing is brave. The things that when we're feeling trauma, we often feel like those symptoms are a sign of weakness. Whether I feel shame, or whether I want to pull away, or whether I don't trust people, all the things that happened when you feel traumatized can make you feel like you're weaker. But actually, survival is its own thing, and the healing part is really brave, to stay in conversations that are hard, and it's brave for the people who are doing the healing, and it needs to be brave for the people who are helping to heal others, right? To be able to sit with somebody who's having a hard time and know you can't fix it. That your job actually is to sit with them while they heal, right? And it's part of why it's so poignant to sit with an animal, like if you've had a cat or a dog that's been sick. It's very poignant to sit with a pet because you can't reason with them. They're just purely hurt, and you have to sit with their pure hurt. And the truth is, we have to sit with that with each other as well. And the last belief I have about healing is that no one heals alone. No one. It's not how we're built. My grandmother was a social worker for the state of Maryland for 25 years. And my parents were teenagers when I was born, so she was a young grandmother. I'm older than she was. And on her refrigerator, on a yellowed piece of paper, she had a quote that she made me read out loud every time I visited her, from the time I was 5 and could read until I was well out of college. And it was, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. It's Margaret Mead's quote. And I think it's part of the fabric of my being at this point, but I've also seen in healing that we need each other to heal. Most repeated traumas are repeated relational traumas. They are traumas that happen between people, whether that's child abuse or domestic violence, war, racial violence. It's all people to people. And relational traumas need to be healed in relationship. They cannot be healed by themselves. But once again, I think we often go to only the mental health aspects of healing, which I'm all for. I am a therapist, I have a therapist, I'm all for therapy. But there's something bigger than that. And that is that we can care for each other by really attending to the humanity of each other, right? To the kindness of each other, the I'm happy to see you, right? Just that feeling. Do you ever watch a parent and a kid when the kid's learning to walk? And the look on the parent's face is like, oh my God, he's walking, right? And the joy on the face of that parent, that is the face we need for our fellow citizens right now. We need the, I'm so happy, look at you, you're walking after COVID, it's amazing, right? That's the joy and energy we need to bring to this healing, and that no one heals alone. Our brains are wired to grow in relationship. We are born tiny with bigger beings around us to help us grow, right? And that's how we are designed to grow. So I think one thing you guys all can do is spread the word and help other people understand it's not something I have to go off and do all by myself and then come back fixed, right? All right, if we do that, one thing, that'll be great. So I've been writing about healing for a long time. I started my book in 2005. It took about 10 years to write, and then a few years to get published. And since 2015, when it really I finished writing that book, in the last 7 or 8 years, I've been looking at the idea of healing connected to a larger arc of work. That you come out of healing and you actually end up in a middle space that I'll talk about a little bit more later, but that I'm calling emergence. And then you come from emergence into growth. And that probably over the course of a human's life, we cycle through those places because we get hit by things in our lives, to no fault of our own often, right? We lose a loved one, or we get ill, or we witness something scary, or the world is scary, right? So understanding the whole arc, I told you I talk with my hands. Understanding the whole arc is really important so that you know where you are. You know what you need to focus on at that time. So we're going to start with healing. So I've been talking about trauma in a lot of places where they wouldn't have normally talked about trauma. In corporate America, for example, which usually you think trauma is like, oh, I just talk to therapists on my spare time. But here's the thing. Adults spend most of their time at work or school. More time than they spend at home with their loved ones or in their leisure activities or in their houses of faith. We spend most of our time in these structured places. So we have to make these structured places where people can heal and grow so that we have full, healthy human beings, right? And there were a lot of demographics up there. I mean, the 1 million COVID deaths, even if each of those people was connected to 7 people, and there's probably a lot more, that's 7 million grieving people, right? I mean, it's staggering to hold the numbers. And so, I think it's also really important to remember that everybody's dealing with this in different ways. COVID was an asymmetrical storm. It hit different people at different times in different ways. There are very few people who didn't have any effect, but there are a lot of people who had a lot bigger effects, right? The same was true with the constant racial injustices. Those were asymmetrical, hit different people in different ways at different times. So a lot of people are talking about trauma right now, and I want to hold that it's very asymmetrical, and people are experiencing it in different ways. I watched it over the course of the 2 years because I was doing work in Italy where they got hit very soon. I worked with a team in Milan. I got it myself, or very early on. But then, there were states that were like, oh, we don't have a problem, until they did, right? And there were hospitals that didn't have a problem until they did. And so everybody's coming out of this and going around it in a different way. And so that's the other thing that I think it's a good lesson. I think that's always true, that things are asymmetrical. But this one's made it very visible for us. So when we talk about trauma, I think it's important actually for you to go from your experience first. So once again, I'm going to time you. And for a minute, I want you to turn to a person near you and talk about what you think your definition of trauma is. And online, you can throw that definition into chat. Ready, steady, go. So impressive. I want to take you to all my speeches. So as I was saying, all trauma is not the same, right? The working definition I use for acute trauma is an experience and an event that overwhelms your capacity to protect or defend yourself, right? In essence, it breaks through a levee, right? It breaks through a system of protections. And that's part of the asymmetry, because we all come to the world with different defenses, right? No one comes to trauma a blank slate. We all show up with a life behind us to the things we run into, some of which might help us in that situation, and some of us that might put us on the back foot in that situation, right? And that's another thing to take into account as you're supporting each other, that we all came to that situation differently. Some people, when the first day of lockdown of COVID, had just gotten divorced, right? Some people on the first day of lockdown had just gotten married. I can't tell you how it all turned out either way, but they were in different situations, right? The hallmarks of trauma are helplessness and terror. So, one time the definitions of trauma really focused on war veterans, on that you had to have an experience of being, your life being in danger. And they've expanded that because just being terrified is enough to release all the same chemicals. And it's a mammalian impact. So if, our response to extreme stress and trauma is the same as it is for the tiger and for your cat, that our bodies respond to it the same. Our heart rate increases, our blood pressure increases, our pupils dilate, we get really focused on what's in front of us. All the blood moves to our skeletal muscles so that we could run away or fight. And it's a system that's entirely designed for a physical interaction, which only becomes problematic in this day and age when we're sitting around a table at a very kind of conflictual meeting and, we're ready to fight or run away. And that would be socially unacceptable in most cases, right? So I actually want to, Dan Siegel does this great thing to show you what happens to your brain under severe stress or trauma. And so just pick a hand, any hand, right? And we're going to give you a neuroscience. So your arm is your spinal column. The palm of your hand is your brainstem, the part of your brain that does wake, eat, sleep, hunger, sex, that. Your thumb is your limbic system. You're going to fold it over. Your limbic system does connection and emotion. The thumbnail of your thumb is the amygdala. That's the part of your brain that does fight or flight, right? And actually stores all of your emotional memories up until about the age of 3. And your four fingers are your thinking brain, your neocortex. And you're going to fold your fingers over, and the nails on your ring finger and your middle finger are your prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain that does all the executive function and control. It helps orient your brain. And when you experience extreme stress or kind of lose it, this is what happens. You flip your lid, right? And all you have left to think with is your brainstem and your limbic system. Your thinking brain is offline and is of no use to you at that point. And there are 2 ways that a brain comes back online. One way is physiological, since that's how we were designed. If I was going to fight a tiger or run away from a tiger, either way I'd be breathing pretty hard. And it's diaphragmatic deep breathing that triggers the relaxation response in the brain and helps us slow down. That's one way. I can't tell you how many people are disappointed that I come all the way this way and I'm like, well, just breathe. But it's true. The second way that our brains come back online is they have to find another brain. We're designed this way. When we find another calm brain, our limbic system connects and our brains come back online. If you find another charged up brain, all you do is fire each other up, right? So you need to find a calmer brain. And that calmer brain can even be your pet. It can be any calm mammal brain will help us slow down, right? And some of you have heard the fight, flight, and freeze. Freeze is actually it's an instinct. Your body will do it when it doesn't think either flight or flee will work. It'll just stop dead. If any of you have watched a rabbit on a New Jersey lawn, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But what happens, so that's acute trauma. What happens when trauma happens repeatedly? When it's not just one car accident, but a car accident every day for months and years, which sounds absurd, except when you think about people living in situations of violence, and actually I would say at a chronic low level, some people are really experiencing around COVID, we have a different set of responses. Our brains and bodies are too smart to gear up completely in a state of chronic trauma. We start shutting down. If you've ever had the smoke alarm in your house, the battery die, usually like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you just do anything, you like rip that thing out, right? That's sort of what our body does when we're experiencing chronic trauma. Our body goes in and says, you know what, we're done. I'm not gonna listen to the fear anymore. I'm just gonna go numb. I'm gonna pull away. I'm gonna be more apathetic. I'm gonna take my limited brain space and put it to the things that I really need it for, and I'm not gonna pay attention to that, right? It becomes part of our personalities, actually. So repeated trauma is really 3 forms of trauma. And this fundamentally is why we're not good at healing it. Because we're really like we really like the first one, and we don't pay attention to the second 2, right? So the first form of trauma, repeated trauma, is what did happen, right? What you remember, the stories you remember. Although if trauma happens repeatedly for a long time, you stop actually registering each discrete event. It just becomes one kind of mass in your brain of that era. But we're a culture that loves the trauma story, and we think if we can get people to tell the story, then they're done. They're healed. And it is an important part of healing, but it's not the end of healing. And that's another take-home message I want you to leave with and help people understand. You're ambassadors now, in case you didn't know. Because if you understand that there's more to it, you actually can get to the place where you feel a lot better. So the second form of repeated trauma is what you did to survive. It's the protections you used, whether I kind of kept to myself, or I did it all by myself, or I stopped feeling, or I pushed other people away. Whatever the thing was that helped me feel a little bit safer during that time. I never left my house during COVID, right? things like that. The protections you use to survive are great, and I wouldn't take away any of them during the time that the trauma was happening. But once it's over, it's a little like saying I flew from Anchorage, Alaska to Miami, and in Anchorage I needed this really warm coat, and I get off the plane in Miami and I won't take it off, right? It really helped me in Anchorage, but in Miami I'm going to be really hot and uncomfortable in it. And it's not serving me, but I don't know how to get rid of it. And the last form of trauma, of repeated trauma, is what didn't happen. So while trauma's occurring, as I said earlier, trauma shuts down growth. You can see it in war. Right now in Ukraine, they are not building roads. They are not building schools. They are not focusing on the growth of their people, right? They're focused on survival. So and that's true on the country level, it's true on the individual level. And kids who've grown up with trauma in their childhoods didn't learn a bunch of things. Maybe they didn't learn how to have a hobby and have leisure time, or didn't learn how to make friends as easily. There are just things that they didn't get to do. What didn't happen is the learning that didn't happen in those developmental times you were experiencing trauma. This is also a great place for hope, because actually all those things are learnable. All those things can be attended to, and places like the Wellness Center or activities here can give people opportunities to learn things that they might have missed. That's exactly what institutions like this can offer, both students and the community. I've been working a lot with first responders and physicians and school administrators who, all through the pandemic, were at the height of stress. And it's been really helpful for them to understand this sort of a chronic experience of extreme stress and what that does to our physiology and then eventually to our personalities. So you'll see that looks like a roller coaster, right? And basically, people go to work or they go into their day and it's a high adrenaline experience. And they might be, for some people, they might be irritable or anxious or kind of vigilant about things. I've worked with physicians or first responders who's like, I feel like myself. When I'm that geared up, I feel great. And then I go home, I walk through the door, or in this new modern era, I turn off my computer, and I sit in my comfy chair, and I just plummet, I sink. And I find myself hour later scrolling on things I'm not even that interested in, or I've watched 5 episodes of something I'm not that interested in, but I can't seem to move away from this spot I've fallen into. And then I get up and I do the same thing again. Go up, highly anxious, irritable, on, energized, plummet, apathetic, numb, bored, I can't get out. And this is the roller coaster of extreme stress. And the goal is actually to be in the middle, to be inside a window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance isn't perfection. The window of tolerance is a place where you can roll with things. Where if you're walking to the car and you drop all your papers on the ground, you might utter a couple choice words, but mostly you just pick them up and you're like, oh, all right, whatever. And you keep going. It doesn't end your day, right? That's that place I have a little give. The way to be in the center is that you actually have to own the roller coaster. You have to intentionally shift from high gear into the center. It doesn't happen naturally. If you just let go, you plummet. But if you go hand over hand, you get to the center. And if you're above the line of your window of tolerance, you need soothing. You need to bring your body down to a calmer level. And that will be the activities that will get you there will be different for everybody, right? So it might be listening to music. It might be talking to a friend on the way home or after work. It might be taking your dog for a walk around the block. It might be tidying your kitchen or starting dinner. needs to be often associated with the five senses, helps you soothe. But this is where you get to be researchers of your own experience. So this is an experimental experience where you go, I'm going to try this and see what's the effect. Ooh, that calmed me. Great. I'm going to add that to the list, right? If you've already plummeted and find yourself glued to the comfy chair, the thing you need to do is energize. So that might be exercise, it might be loud music, it might be cleaning like one closet in your house, it might be going for a walk, doing something that brings energy back into your being. Being upright helps a lot, so something that involves standing and moving around. So really, your job is to own the roller coaster. And I've found that when people focus on this, make this a goal, all right, like what am I going to do to own the roller coaster at the end of my each day? It's really supporting their well-being, their resilience, and feeling a lot better in their bodies. So how do we heal? I love what it's just like one simple graphic. It reminds me, my brother, when he was in high school, drove the car into the garage door. And his punishment was that he had to replace the garage door. And they got a garage door in a box, and it said, 3 easy steps to hanging a garage door. And the first step was, make sure the garage is plumb and level. If anybody here has ever tried to build anything, like in an old house, that was months of work probably, right? So, I have the model up. I'm aware that it's not 3 easy steps. This is this cycle of healing from repeated trauma was created because I found that people came to therapy to get well. And, when people come to therapy to get well, they have a lot of hope that they're going to feel better than they do when they made the phone call to call you, right? But the truth about healing from trauma, much like if you've had a physical injury, is that you're going to feel worse before you feel better at different points in time. And I really wanted people to understand the different aspects of the journey so that you could then say to yourself, it's hard. Like, it's supposed to feel hard. It's not my fault. I'm not doing something wrong for me to feel bad. This is just part of the process. This is where we are, right? And I think that in this post-COVID world, I think that's a big piece of what everybody's being pulled down by. I think there's been this thing like, oh, COVID's over, woohoo, you're back, you're going to feel great. And I don't think everybody feels great yet, right? I think we've got some kind of stretching and moving, and we haven't, we're a little sore. Like, we haven't used that muscle in a long time, right? So it gives us patience if we understand the whole process. I was a backpacker when I was younger. I aspire to it again, but we'll see. And I was hiking this trail that was very, very steep. And I was in good shape. I was a rower. So I was in the best shape of my life at this time, and it was still very steep. And it was very steep, and then was very steep down, and very steep up, and very steep down. And I literally pulled off and was like, oh, I'm going to look at the map because I hope I'm on the wrong trail. And the guidebook, this is a White Mountain guidebook, they describe each of the trails, and they describe this trail as a seemingly endless series of ups and downs, which was so accurate. And also was the working title of this book for about 10 years, because that's what it can feel like, right? And if you know if the guidebook guy's like, it's a seemingly endless series of ups and downs, you're like, all right, I'm on board now. Like, he thought it was hard. I'll be okay. So it's made up of 5 different sections. The first is preparation. Preparation is the phase where you get all your resources in order. It's the work before the work, is the way I like to describe it. And you look internally, like, how is my motivation? What are my values? Why do I want to get better, right? It is the Can I use my sense of humor or my optimism or my love of children or my love of my family? What am I using from inside me that's going to help me get better, right? And then the other resources, do I have a safe place to live? Do I have food that I can eat? Do I have, and I think this one's really important, do I have meaningful activity? That it doesn't necessarily mean a paid job, but something that matters to me, that makes me want to get up in the morning and be connected to the present. Part of healing from trauma that's difficult is we get kind of sucked into the past. We have to go back there to sort through stuff. But if we don't have something connecting us to the present, like a belay rope, it's a lot harder to come back and forth. So meaningful activity is really important. You need to be connected to any helping supports you have, whether that's therapy, whether that's clergy, whether that's just a really great group of friends. So you need connections to heal. And all of that needs to be set, I believe, before you start healing. That work is healing in and of itself. But I liken healing from trauma to a high-altitude climb, to going up Mount Everest. And it takes a year, if you're in good shape, to get ready to go up Everest. You have to make sure that you have the equipment you need and that your team's set and you know what you're doing. It's respectful of that journey, and so preparation is too. And it's called preparation and not safety, even though we're building safety, because a lot of trauma survivors don't know what it feels like to feel safe. And calling it safety doesn't allow them to approach it with just the tasks at hand and then get to safety in their own time. And then the next phase is, once you feel safe, this is where, remember where I started and I said, people want to grow, things want to grow. If you take the things out of the way, people will start growing. Well, that same is true of healing. So once people actually do feel a little bit settled and safe, trauma's going to start coming out. The story will come out, the experiences, their defenses, things that they want to get healed. That phase is called unintegration. Things come up and out. The pieces come up and out. And then when they do, you can start sorting them. That's identification. And putting names to them and putting language to them. Often in traumatic situations, our brains actually shut down the blood flow to the parts of our brain that makes language. So sometimes when people say it was unspeakable or I don't have language for it, it's partly because your brain shut that piece down. It was too busy keeping you alive to take notes, if you will. And it means that going back, you have to sort it for yourself and start putting names. And it's an iterative process, much like the twigs we started with. So you might say, oh, I feel anxious, or is it anxious? Do I feel terrified? You start sorting the words that help you make sense of your own story. And then when you have the pieces of your story and the feelings of your story and the experiences of protecting yourself and letting them go, they come together, and that's integration. And the goal of healing really is integration, to bring it all into one place. The goal is wholeness, which is what we're going to get to with wellness, right? And the last phase is consolidation. Like preparation, you need a bit of time to feel the sturdiness that you just built, to actually practice some of the new behaviors that you might have put into place, to feel yourself, to have an identity of I'm the kind of person who just was able to do X, Y, or Z, and live in the world that way. So I don't know how your therapist spent the pandemic, but mine raised monarch butterflies. And I got to see them at one point, but partway through the pandemic, I was feeling really frustrated in feeling like, I've worked really hard to heal, and I still feel stuck. And she started telling me about the butterflies, about how when butterflies emerge from their chrysalis, they come out of their chrysalis and their bodies are filled, they're chubby, they're filled with fluid, and their wings are all crumpled. And I actually started to cry because I thought, I know those wings, man. My wings feel crumpled right now. right? And I think a lot of people's wings feel crumpled right now. We thought we'd emerge full out, and we're emerging kind of crumpled, right? And they find a spot to hang on to, and they spend almost a whole day, and sometimes even more, flapping their wings, and that pulls the liquid out of their bodies and into their wings, so their wings are solid. And that's how they get strong enough to fly. And simultaneously, their proboscis, what will eventually become their feeding tube, also comes out disconnected. And they have to curl it and uncurl it multiple times all day for it to connect to itself so that the feeding tube is strong, so that they can take in nourishment. And this is what we're doing, and I think this is the phase that we're in with emergence. And it gives us, thank you, butterflies, it gives us 3 things we can pay attention to. One is we need a solid platform. They have to hang on to someplace all day. We need a solid platform, and by that I mean we need to know the things we know, even the things we know about ourselves. Like, I know I run anxious. I get to places early. That helps me. That's something I know. I can hang on to that. I like to walk in the morning. It makes me feel better. That's something I know. That's a solid platform, right? Each of you is going to have a different version of a solid platform, but find the things that are solid for you right now. Any tiny thing, that's the place you hang on to build back. Then you need practices, routines, having some, I have my coffee and I read the paper. That's a routine. It doesn't have to be wildly glorious. It just has to be something you can count on. Or new practices. I'm trying to reach out to different friends once a week. That's a new practice to get me reconnected with people I haven't seen in a while, right? That's flapping my wings to get some of that strength back. And then strengthening resources for nourishment. And that is a big one right now, post-COVID. When a butterfly comes out of its chrysalis, it's depleted. It's going to need nourishment. And so when we've come out of these 2 years, we need nourishment. How can you refuel, repair, regenerate? Where can you take in, right? And get energy. And for some of you, people fill your energy. And for some of you, people drain your energy, right? But finding ways that you can feel your energy. So, we've talked about healing, we've talked about emergence, and now we're going to talk about growth through looking at resilience. So wellness, today's a big day of the Wellness Center. This painting is by a Japanese artist, Utagawa Toyokuni. It was painted in the late 1700s, and it's called Doing Laundry by the Well Curb. And I really was starting to think a lot about wells in coming to talk here today, and how they used to be a center of people's communities, right? I mean, talk about the pull between now, we got to do it by myself because I can go and turn on my own faucet by myself, versus I have to go to the well and meet a wonderful group of people every morning, right? And see how the world's working and get help and do my laundry with other people, not just all by myself in my basement, right? When I actually do it. So the wells were a place where humanity came together, and they were a form of resilience against not having water. We gathered water so that you weren't entirely dependent on whether it rained or your stream had water. They were one of the first sources of resilience for a community. All right, so 1 minute, now you know the drill. 1 minute. What's your definition of resilience? And throw it in the chat. Ready, steady, go. We're going through all the stages of group development now. By the third one, you're like, I don't have to listen to you. So resilience is your reserve well. Resilience isn't, I had a very wise teacher at one point tell me that you should have two wells. The well that you pull out of for your life and a reserve well that you use to support other people. And if you start pulling out of your own well, you're pulling it out of your own cells, right? Resilience really is about having a reserve well. How many of you have cars? All right, that's a lot. How many of you who have cars have a spare tire that's an actual whole tire? Not that many anymore. Used to be a thing. How many of you have those cute little donuts? Yeah. So what I've been trying to help people understand is that resilience is the donut, right? You should have it. I mean, in some ways, we've just divided the world into two kinds of people, the actual tire and the donut tire, right? The people with the actual tire are slightly more resilient than you people with donut tires. Because if they get a flat and put that on, they can go for longer. Only if they don't replace their spare, then they're just as much out of luck when they get another flat, right? But you donut people can't drive that far on your donut. It takes you to the mechanic to get a new tire, right? And that I can get to the mechanic to get a new tire, that's resilience, right? In this new, euphemism world where resilience and wellness all means I can make you work as hard as possible endlessly and you should just have a battery that never loses its charge, I want to debunk the myth, right? Resilience is a finite resource. You can run out of it. It also means, like the reserve well or your donut, that you should make sure you have it and it's filled and ready to go. It's supposed to be there to catch you, right? But if you're driving on it all the time, you can't take care of it. To have a resilient stance, their life should be predictable enough. There should be the resources to meet the demands, and the demands should be important enough to you to do. They shouldn't be pointless, right? And that's part of why people aren't feeling resilient right now. This has been an unpredictable set of years. I mean, so unpredictable that when I was trying to do the slides 2 weeks ago, I was like, wow, who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks? I might need a completely different set of slides, right? The world just feels unpredictable right now. And I've heard a lot of young people talking about the fact that things feel kind of pointless. Where am I headed? What am I going to do, right? So we have to help people get back to in some ways, their noble purpose. What do I want to do in the world? What questions am I interested in? My favorite is, what problems do I want to solve? How do I want to make a difference, right? And if you can get kind of grounded into those questions, you can find your resilience a bit more. There was a belief for a long time that resilience resided only inside the individual. So up until about the late 70s, all of the resilience literature that exists in psychology was mostly done on white businessmen, because that's who was in the business world, and that's where they were interested in resilience. And then post-late 70s into the 80s and 90s, they started doing more research, and the workplaces were more diverse. And lo and behold, they found that in addition to resilience residing inside the individual, people started talking about the fact that they felt resilient because of their relationships. Or they felt resilient because of their connection to faith or higher power or God or something they believed in. And in some ways, I like to think of it like a pie chart with wedges, that we probably all would divide that pie chart up differently. That we all lean on some aspects of those, but we don't lean on all of them the same. And during the pandemic, and this is a good thing to keep in mind, is that when the world gets hard, it gets hard in different ways that may not allow people to lean on their resilience in the way they usually do. So for people who found resilience through connection with other people, and that was their biggest source of resilience, the pandemic was very, very hard, right? They had to find other ways to do that. And the people who were resilient on their own might have lasted a little longer before they felt worn out. Which brings us to wellness, which is, in some ways a bucket term that I want us to connect to through resilience and then looking at growth. So once again, 1 minute, ready, steady, go. How would you define wellness? I should just end on a question and walk away. Leave you guys to your devices. So, I'm sure you were talking about all different parts of yourself, right, that look at wellness, whether it's your physical aspects of yourself or your emotional well-being. The roots of wellness, when we talk about holistic health, are words like whole or heal or holy, right? So there's a very deep history of what it means to be well and whole. And it also means that we're used to looking at kind of very small aspects of our lives and not stepping back and taking the whole picture in, right? So this is a holistic view of yourself. You have your cognitive thinking self, which includes things like attention and memory. And attention is really plummeting these days with things like this, right? The truth about memory is that lots of people, as they get older, are like, oh, my memory's going. Actually, you know what's going? Your attention. Your attention's going partly because we're designed that way, partly because we are doing multitasking in our brain. So when you're talking to me, there's a part of my brain that's going, just waiting for the thing that I know is different. I'm not actually listening to every word, right? And that's part of the problem is we don't attend the way, have you ever met a 4-year-old? They're like videotaping, right? They take in every single word, every detail, because they're in the full-on growth mode, right? So we need our attention back to heal and grow. We really do. But we need to interfere in the things that are breaking our attention. So we have thinking self. We have our emotional self. Do I know what I'm thinking and feeling? Like, do I even have the words for them? There's a great online, and I can send it later. There's a great feelings wheel, that's got them all. You can be like, oh, no, it's this, not that. And they've done research to show that if you can use the actual word, you actually feel better, right? So the more specific you are, you actually feel better. Partly, it's like a wonderful game of lost and found. If you can tell somebody, I feel really sad right now, and you feel heard, you make contact, right? And you actually feel found. And we're pack animals. We want to be found. We want to be connected. Our brains release oxytocin when we feel connected, the same as it releases when we hold babies or pat kittens. The next one is physical self. And when they ask me to speak, usually you're afraid of public speaking for all the obvious reasons, but I think post-COVID, most of us are afraid that we wouldn't fit into our pants, right? Our physical selves really got hit during COVID. And so, how can we rebuild? How can we feel connected to our bodies in a new way? How can we take care of them? I think we also had to learn, boy, this is something we need to take care of because it was up against a big challenger, right? Our spiritual selves, whether that's organized religion or just our sense of connection with some higher order being or belief system, I need to be in the woods at least once a day. I need to be around trees. I wear trees. I feel better when something's way taller than I am. And that helps me. And then relational self, how we are in connection. We are designed to be in connection. That is not a separate aspect of us. And so how are my relationships? Do I get to spend time in them? Who am I missing? Do I feel left out? Do I know if somebody else feels left out? Right? So I'm going to end with a story. Do you guys mind if we go 10 minutes over? All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. because this is a story I'd like to share. So I was doing my clinical internship, the big one that you're supposed to do to be a psychologist, at a hospital in Stoneham, Mass, that partway through my internship in January of that year went bankrupt. It was a for-profit hospital, and it went under. And I found out, like all the staff did, on the news. And in 3 days, I had to say goodbye to all of my outpatient clients, 35 kids and adults, and transfer all my inpatient clients. And gratefully, because of the generosity of the other training directors in Boston, we were able to finish our internship. So I went back to Cambridge Hospital, where I had been the year before. But we were all devastated. We lost our group, we lost our patients, I lost my connection to my year, and I had to start again. And I ended up in a counseling center in the Somerville housing projects. And they had one of the apartments in the projects they turned it into a counseling center. And you should know first that in places that get a lot of turnover of staff, when you're a student intern, they rotate through. They're like, we're gonna wait you out. So I was kind of the Maytag repairman for a couple months. For those of you who never saw the commercial, he did nothing. Because people would make appointments, they'd call, they wouldn't come, I'd call, and they'd say, I'll come next week. And basically, they were trying to see if you were really gonna stay, right? As they should. There was no reason they shouldn't have done that. But I needed to feel like I was doing something. I needed to heal. I was hurt from my losses. And so I noticed that there was a community garden in the space behind the building I was working in. And I went to the authorities and I asked if there were no more actual garden plots, but there was this kind of one piece of land that was not very promising, but it was what there was. So I said, yes, I'll take it. And I started building a garden for the counseling center. And I went on weekends and I took all my gardening stuff from home and pieces of wood, I literally just all the scraps I could find. And in the garden, the other gardens were all being gardened by old women who were Vietnamese, Americans, I imagine, and with like the traditional hats, and they would come over and talk at me in Vietnamese, and they seemed very concerned about something, but I couldn't tell what, and I kept trying to reassure them that I knew how to garden and that it was okay. And then finally one day, they walked over with a pair of gloves and handed them, and they pointed to my hands. And it turned out they were very upset that I had been gardening barehanded. And after that, they would wave, and I would wave my gloved hand, and they were very reassured. So I was getting to have my experience of healing, and that it was possible, right? That I could create a new place after a big loss, and I could take something that was dirty and rocky and not very promising and start turning it into a garden. And I was starting to learn that no one heals alone, that across language differences and age differences and misunderstandings, I had a group of old women who are just on my side, right, healing with me. And I also decided to create a girls' garden group. So one of my dear friend's daughters had community service that she needed to do. So she came along as my assistant. I'd pick her up. She was a young teenager at the time, and we would get iced coffee from Dunkin' Donuts and drive to Somerville and meet up with the girls. And the girls were allowed to choose 5 plants of any kind that they wanted in their plot. And I made no rules about it. So we had corn, and we had petunias, and we had carrots, and we had geraniums. Anything they wanted, I tried to find it, because I thought that would be part of the fun. And the beauty of it was that it helped them not only understand healing, but growing, with the patience it takes to do both. that you put a radish seed in and it's not there next week yet. It takes 21 days to get a radish, and that's the fastest plant you're going to grow, right? But that they started understanding that things take time, and that things take time of their own accord, and that there's something bigger in the world that helps things grow. My support network donated strawberries and sunflowers. And that you have to tend growth. It doesn't just happen. You have to water it. You have to care for it. And they started caring for each other. And on the very last day of the Girls Garden Group, we held a party where we served strawberries and peas and radishes from the garden itself. We made paper flowers to symbolize the flowers that would eventually grow because it was June and there were not that many flowers yet. But I also feel compelled to say that it is a lovely story, and it's not a fairy tale story, right? So the 12 girls started this group, 12 girls finished this group. Not a single one of each of those groups was the same girls. They came and went, as is the chaos of that particular area, and yet they all were free to choose how they engaged. All of them eventually went back to see their own flowers and whether they were growing. And they got what they needed and moved on. So I'm going to leave you with one last thing. And that is that every day when I get home from my walk, I go to my backyard in a garden I planted with a lot of COVID anxiety. And I look for what's growing. I go to the base of different plants and I'm looking for the little shoots, or I'm looking for what just bloomed that day, or I'm looking for the bud on the shrub that I'm waiting for. And I greet them. I'm like, hey, welcome, yay, you're here. And it changes the way you look at the world. To look for what's growing is so different than to look for what's not there. And I don't think we do it enough for ourselves. And I think part of our sturdiness and part of our resilience through this period of emergence is really about look for what's growing. Look for the new thing that you didn't think you did anymore. Look for the person that you didn't actually notice in class last time and say hello. So taking time to really look for what's growing. So thank you very much. It's been a real privilege, and just I would stay forever, probably. And I look forward to speaking with you and connecting with you and being part of your community ongoing.